wonderful presentation from Juan on Filecoin Plus decision design considerations. Take it away.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Sorry for having to readjust the timing on this. So what I wanted to do today is to walk through a bunch of key important background understanding things about the motivations for the program in general, because I've seen a lot of discussions in the community over the last year misunderstand key components or think that the program is meant to do something when it's doing something else and so on. So I want to use this moment to kind of like zoom out and reorient, like remember why this component is there. And then I want to dive into a discussion, and I want this to be interactive, around kind of design constraints. Although, maybe for, depending on timing, the interactivity we might push into the next session, right? Because the next section is the discussion one, right? Or did that, no? Or rather, how much time do I have? Because I can have the discussion that you wanted to maybe have here.
It would be great if you did a 15-minute discussion and we push the interactive component.
Yeah.
But let's just see how the conversation goes.
Okay, got it. So the interactive discussion is happening or it's not happening? That's what I'm...
It's slated at the end.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so great. So that's what I just want to orient some of this thinking to have that broader discussion. All right, great. So as we talked earlier in the week, this is the mission of Filecoin. Like that's what the project has been about for about close to 10 years now. Won't recap it here, but you can go watch that talk. And what I want to highlight here is the data storage part. There's a lot of people in the community right now that think that Filecoin is just for hardware and just for accumulating hardware to do wasteful work. That's not what the project is about. The project is about data storage and to route the block reward to get data storage. So that's a fundamental thing in the project and a fundamental thing in the inception of the thing in 2014 all the way to now. I will walk through why you can't easily decouple these two things and build the data storage component on top of just a hardware piece and why they have to be coupled. I want to kind of walk through something, do a quick refresher of the economy. So remember, it's an export economy. You can grow value in the economy. You have imports that bring value into the economy. You're exporting some product out and you're importing value into the economy. You have exports where you bring some products or services into the economy, but you're outputting value. And these change the economy in various flows. So if you can kind of like think about the actual flows and model them. And by the way, we should probably model this. Like there should be a real-time view into how the entire economy is functioning, because that will give everybody a much greater degree of visibility into how the entire operation is meant to work. But I'll kind of just touch on these four components briefly, because they're kind of key to the whole how the block reward is meant to function. So the first part is in any kind of current economy, you can have internal businesses, which means sales within that currency. That some examples of that means the FVM transaction tip to the participant that produces the block. You can have money being exchanged in terms of capital leasing or lending or staking. You could buy the hardware in Filecoin. You could pay for OpEx or pay for CapEx in Filecoin. This happens a lot. Like there's all kinds of salaries and grants and so on that flow in this way. You can have businesses, entire operations get acquired, bought or sold directly and denominated in Filecoin. So that's all activity happening within the economy, currency flows within the economy, increasing the GDP of that economy. So crypto economies have this, or all economies have some notion of burn. You can think of the interest rate of the government as like increasing the kind of soaking up of capital, which help the currency orient closer to the total value of the economy. In Filecoin, you have things like the gas used for mining, the gas used for applications, the gas used for L2s. You have slashing fees and so on. There's many more burn components that will be developed over time. You now have exports and imports. And so exports is when you're sending a product or service out, but you're bringing value in. So I'm highlighting the arrow coming in because what you should be thinking about is producing services, producing value, and exporting it out into the world, bringing value into the economy. So that means participants buying Filecoin in order to access the internal businesses that are happening inside of the economy, those transactions, namely things like selling storage, using FVM to sell storage directly. So either SPs selling the storage in Filecoin or through the system, or FVM applications selling that storage. There are two different flows there. Note that if SPs sell the storage not in Filecoin, in some other currency, that activity is actually outside of the economy and it leaks value out. So it's very important, like if you want Filecoin to succeed as a community, that all of that gets denominated in the currency. So I've seen a bunch of discussions about, just charge for fiat and so on, and transact there. That just will create a lot of value outside and will leach value out of the community. Then there's, of course, buying Filecoin in order to participate in the system. So things like collaterals, leasing, staking, and so on. Now the import, so when you're buying other goods or buying other systems, services, and so on, that's when you're paying for OpEx or CapEx. So this means like you're paying salaries, you're buying food, you're like buying shelter, like all of those kinds of things are imports because the Filecoin economy does not currently produce food or shelter denominated in Filecoin. There's a hope in the entire crypto space that eventually the crypto economies will actually get large enough to start doing that. But that's, think 10, 20, 30 years out. So by modeling these flows and understanding how they move, that's how you can get a sense of the value of the economy. And remember that there's a block reward emission that's happening here. I need to actually add it in. There's a key component that's an internal business where the block reward emission is paying for the broader accumulation of hardware and the broader production of the service itself. So we as a community are spending the block reward in order to produce the service that we're planning to export. Right? So we are developing a service that we're planning to export. The block reward is funding that operation. It's not just hardware, it's the actual data storage. You can now think of that economy and size it relative to the other markets. And you should be thinking about how do you take those exports and bring a bunch of the business and activity in these other markets into this economy. How do you sort of connect the flows here? So as these other markets are growing, how do you enable this economy to participate in those and grow along with them and route more of that value flow? If we can use the block reward to provide a very good archival storage market, a very good CDN market, a very good object storage market, and so on, then we will be able to inch deeper and deeper and deeper into those markets, address those markets, and have this economy grow along with those. So again, key component here, the block reward is what was funding that flow. That funding flow does not happen outside. If it were to happen outside with other capital expenditures, that's value that's happening outside of the ecosystem. And usually the current tools of capital mandate that that's happening in whatever other currency those parties are transacting in. That's not going to happen in Filecoin. That might start happening in Filecoin once Filecoin is about like 20 to 30% of these other markets. Then at that point, you might start thinking that will occur naturally. But before that, you basically have to fund it within the system. So the block rewards value is what accelerates your growth into these systems if you're using the block reward to fund those operations. Then you can get into how do you value currencies. If you get to if the economy is producing well and growing and so on, then you get a greater purchasing power. You can the value of your exports is great, and therefore you can import more stuff, and you can keep compounding that flow. And so things like modeling how do you value currencies is critical to be able to drive that entire growth loop. I won't get into great detail here, but just remember that there are good standard ways of thinking about this in macroeconomics, ways of thinking about exchange rates and so on, that give you the general structure. Cool. So I motivated this at the beginning of the summit. There are these specific markets, and the key one, when you think about the Web3 storage market, it's tiny. The Web2, the rest of the markets are all Web2. In order to win in that environment, because they're saturated, we need to be able to fund the growth of that operation by underpricing the storage. We need to get to follow the new entrant into a market strategy of offering a few features that are key, that other incumbents can't easily produce, and be able to offer a huge cost reduction to be able to start entering the market and gaining greater and greater and greater market share to be able to grow and exceed the other parties. Remember, this is kind of how the cloud did it, and it's how we have to do it. If we can't pull this off, it won't really work. We'll depend on the Web3 storage market itself growing to that scale, and that may or may not happen. So it'll be that market's success kind of relies on projects like ours. So we cannot just count that Web3 storage market, which is tiny right now, will just magically, out of no actions from us, magically grow into being super successful. It's possible that some of those applications will get there, but most of the Web3 applications today are really Web 2.5 applications that are using the normal cloud. We also talked about the range of things that we have to do as an entire ecosystem in order to be able to get to that scale. So this is funding an enormous amount of build out of operations over 20, 30 years in order to get to that level of scale of an operation. The key here is that we can fund this development, we can fund this build out, we can fund the kind of cloud style long-term feature set generation if we have a profitable economy. If we have a profitable economy that's growing over time and enabling everybody to succeed, that will get built out along the way. In order to get a profitable economy, we need to export a service to the rest of the world at a good enough price point, and we have to get enough and significant market share there. That's the key reason why the block reward needs to flow to the data storage. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Like I know that I might sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but like this last year has had a lot of discussions that think that this is not key. So any like questions here? Cool. We have like tangented so hard here, but this is exactly why I wanted to have this talk, because it's kind of like fundamental assumptions about the model that then output a very different opinion about some important policy question that usually has to do with the block reward or has to do with Filecoin Plus or something like that. And right now the community has like tons of opinions, some of which like are in line with a broad model that we use to design Filecoin, some of which aren't. And the ones that aren't can either be like totally orthogonal, which doesn't matter, or in conflict. And the conflict ones are the problem. Because when we get into conflict, then that's when like we start destroying value. We start spending our heart, we spend a big red arrow out arguing about the model. Like that's not good. Cool. You need the bulk of the block reward to go to funding the data itself. Again, the key reason for that is that you want to be able to enter this market and to grow the economy to be able to capture these markets. Because if you don't capture these markets, you don't get there. If you're not able to pull and build the platform and the network to be able to capture these markets, or a huge fraction of them, then you don't get to that scale. So in order to do this, we need to win out as a product and a service. In order to do that, we need to undercut. And in order to undercut, we need the value flow to be subsidizing the data flow. So now, let's assume that we agree that that's the constraint. Now, what do we do with that? How can we incentivize that data flow? The model of Filecoin is to fund the operations proportional to the service that they provide to the network. And that's kind of the block reward of Bitcoin, block reward of Ethereum, and so on came from that model. But the key issue here is that how do you distinguish a legitimate client bringing in data from a malicious client that's self-dealing, where it's not actually legit data? That's the fundamental problem that Filecoin Plus is solving. You can do other stuff along the way, which is like, turn it into supporting retrievability, or turn it into supporting the selection of valuable data that we all really like versus data that we don't like. But those are kind of like secondary or tertiary goals. The fundamental thing that Filecoin Plus was there to solve is just this key question of how do you distinguish a legit deal that you want to incentivize from a deal that's just trying to take the block reward and steal it from somebody else. That's the key question. And so, you could have like very different distributions of malicious deals. Ideally, we want to have like 0 malicious deals. The ideal kind of framing, and this is from a slide from 2020. The ideal distribution is about 10% committed capacity. That's how much headroom you need in the network. 90% real deals and 0% malicious deals, right? Like that's the ideal that we should all shoot for. Unfortunately, we have not found a cryptographic mathematical way of doing that. There's some kind of impossibility results there, but it would be great to like circumvent them and find a mathematical way of letting computers figure out whether the data was like legit intended from a real client. We are trying to build a set of solutions that can address that problem. And the fundamental idea of the Filecoin Plus architecture is that you can use a variety of allocators and in order to clamp down on the question, meaning you can identify a range of legitimate activity in a very kind of tailored special purpose way, meaning you can design a specific process or program to figure out whether one type of activity is legit or not legit. And the way that you do that for different kinds of data and for different kinds of sizes of data or locations and so on is different. There is no good one-size-fits-all system. And so the idea of the architecture of Filecoin Plus is to use a different set of allocators, which we've called notaries in the past, but I'm going to use the word allocator here to like help you think in a different direction, which is that you're going to trust that allocator with a certain amount of data cap, and that allocator can allocate that data cap to other parties. If that allocator is broken, then you've only risked a certain amount. You haven't risked the entire thing. You've only risked a certain amount, whatever data cap you gave it. These allocators could compose. You could have allocators giving data cap to other allocators that then allocated down in other directions. So think of a network structure where you have data cap flowing from the network, and it flows down to smaller and smaller allocators to find eventually the clients with high likelihood of success. And what you want to do is you want to over time track the success rate of those allocators and making sure that like it's legit or not legit, and tune them, redesign them, replace them, remove them, add new ones, to evolve the structure to be able to orient and steer how that allocation is happening. And so this could be off-chain systems. This could be on-chain systems. This could be automatic, like the GitHub allocator thing, right? Like you allocate some data cap to all GitHub accounts. Like but it's not very much. And why is that not a problem? You could totally use that facility to create malicious deals. It's not a problem because it's very little data. Like you're not going to go through a ton of work to go and like leech off like tiny little bits of data. That's just impractical. Now, when you have petabytes being asked for, like that's a much bigger deal, and like you need much more verification at that point. There are ways of doing it off-chain. There are ways of doing it on-chain. We should explore a bunch of different mechanisms and come up with new structures. So one of the things that we should be doing as a community is designing new allocators, and at a meta level, measuring the success rate of each allocator system to understand what changes need to happen to that allocator system, and when some allocator system should be removed because we have replaced it with we have other ones that are working better. Does that kind of make sense in terms of the model? Because when I hear people arguing about Filecoin Plus, they're usually complaining about one particular allocator, one particular system, or one particular party, or one particular way of doing it, and that's not Filecoin Plus. You're frustrated at one part of it, which there are all kinds of problems. Let's fix them, but let's kind of figure out what exactly is the right thing to solve. Any questions here?
Several times you're saying data that we want. This is very abstract. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
We covered that in the first talk when I gave the talk at the beginning of the summit, which goes back to the mission. It is the union of all information generated by humans that has some purpose that is not just trying to steal the block reward. So that means really valuable data sets like public record, archival information, public record civilization level important data sets, or it means enterprise data that's private, or it means your personal Dropbox style files, whatever. We are building a platform for everything. We want a platform that can support all of the applications. We're trying to build a better foundation for all of humanity's information for the entire internet. We're not just trying to build a better data set distribution system. That's a good worthy goal, but that's a very different scale of project. So this is just a blanket platform to support all data storage. Does that answer the question?
It answers my question. I guess the trouble I'm having with this is that it is both all-inclusive while having an exclusive portion. Just to give an example, let's say I want to store terabytes of logs of some service of mine. It is not valuable for anyone else on the entire planet. Is this a good data, or am I just cheating the system trying to get rewards?
Would you store that in Amazon S3?
No, because I cannot afford it.
But if you could, suppose that you could. Or suppose that Amazon S3 was 10 times or 100 times cheaper, would you?
So if the cost was not a question, yes, I would hoard it. Correct.
Great.
Yes.
That's welcome data. The data that's not welcome is data that you're faking to steal the block reward. That's it.
And
that's what the entire program is designed to stop. Now, there are proposals to say, hey, given that we have this multiplier system, couldn't you give a higher multiplier to data that we all agree is more valuable for the network? And that's a separate question. It's an interesting idea. It has really interesting benefits. It would definitely help the community organize around bringing very precious, valuable data sets, and especially things that we can all compute on. So it has very good pros. It also has some dangerous cons, which is that as the economy fluctuates in price, it might cause parties to shift SLAs and move to certain parties versus other parties. And so it's a separate idea. So it's a good suggestion, but it should be very clearly distinguished from the core problem of just identifying whether or not some data was truly legitimately from a user trying to use the system or a malicious party that is trying to steal the block reward. That's it.
So just to rephrase to make sure that I understand, and correct me if I'm rephrasing it wrong, the data itself at this point doesn't even matter. It's the intent behind this data.
It's exactly the intent, which is what makes it fundamentally a hard thing cryptographically or mathematically. How do we teach a computer to determine the user's intent? It's a fairly difficult thing to do. You could design some automated systems to capture part of it and use some kind of surrounding data, like the GitHub one is a good example. But it's difficult to do that in a holistic way that will capture all potential uses and in a non-gameable way. It's an unfortunate result, the negative result that we can't do that. It would be great if we could do that because, boom, one cryptographic mechanism and then we're done. Like, awesome, problem solved, no argument, all good. But we just don't get that this time around.
Yeah, and I think to Reba's point, like, for example, all of the CERN data, like all of that neutrino data, it's tons of it, and they don't know which parts of it are going to be, the data that's going to be used in the future to figure out the next Higgs boson. Like it looks exactly like those logs from your machine of just like it's logs from the Large Hadron Collider, just going on and on and on and on and on and on. They're logs, and so you can't distinguish based on what the data looks like. If it's encrypted data, you could grab all of your DRAM epochs. It's just random numbers, and it's like it's not the data itself. It's like, is this data being done to try to attack the system? Or is it data that is part of the union of, data that someone somewhere in the world cares about the data being stored?
So all we're trying to do is we're trying to create a mechanism to route the block reward to the production of the goods and services that the Filecoin economy is trying to sell to the rest of the world. It's just we're trying to make sure that the block reward is going for the intended purpose, the data storage. That's it. Separate rewards and multipliers are good ideas, and we should definitely consider them to apply on top, but just very clearly distinguish them as a separate program. More questions? This is really valuable, by the way. I know that I have an intense tone, and maybe everyone's like, oh man, he's yelling at us. But it's just really important to the entire broader structure of the design of the economy that we get this right.
Although we can't solve this cryptographically or algorithmically, it's pretty well solved capitalistically, right? In that these are already paid situations outside of Filecoin's existence. So if that is a functioning system to determine what is valuable and what has valuable intent, should we be leaning on that rather than
it's a tempting idea, and we did think about it before proposing this kind of Datacap allocator strategy. And here's the problem. It doesn't work. If you take some deal flow that's happening with some real money and you then just add another incentive to it that could fluctuate in value to be a sizable amount of that other price, and here, in order to subsidize this, in order to undercut these other players, we're talking about taking an extremely well developed large scale cloud system that has taken 30 years to optimize, massive industries with probably total market size of $100 to $200 billion scale or larger, maybe larger, and with tons of companies, and we're going to say to the best of their optimization ability, we're going to subsidize a huge fraction of that. The moment that you do that, you taint that operation, and now those parties are going to start changing their behavior and changing what they pay in order to take the block reward, because it's that sizable. If it was tiny, if it was a very small fraction, less than 1,000 or something like that, 0.1%, that could work. But when it's sizable and you're actually trying to offset the 90% of that cost, that doesn't work.
My question is now pointless, so I will still say it because I think it might be an interesting thought. But what if Datacap had a quadratic funding kind of aspect to it, where people who had interesting data sets could be supported or support a particular data set, and then the Datacap could match some using the quadratic funding model, some portion against that?
Yeah, it sounds like you should design an allocator and build it. And then if it works, awesome, let's fund it. Let's give it Datacap. Sounds like a great idea.
And then the other thing I was going to just mention is Molly's point earlier about just supporting that. I used to work for Policy Supercomputing Research Facility, and one of the data sets that we like processed over and over again was astronomy data from the Murchison wide field array, and the data is like really looks a lot like random data, and would cryptograph like trying to determine that that's real data and has value is like really difficult. I think another aspect to it is that there's a lot. Even the people that make the data don't necessarily know what date value they can extract from it, and astronomy data is a really great example of that, because like they will pore over the same data set thousands or millions of times in order to actually extract new insights from it. So you don't know what data is valuable. It's not just that you can't easily,
Or it might be encrypted. The data
Right.
might be encrypted, and the rest of the network can't look at it. Sorry.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just wanted to make
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. That's a great point.
I guess like one question which we haven't really talked on, but
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, it has to do with like the gamification side. Does the mission that you sort of laid out then also potentially go at odds with this idea of potentially having negative price storage, if that then potentially creates an incentive for people to, in like just another form of like they're adding stuff to the network in order just to like farm block rewards?
No, but that's the beauty of it. Like that's what this model gives you. So like I was debating whether or not to include that in this talk, but it's like a whole other ballgame, and so I would leave it out. But think of negatively priced storage as a way to greatly accelerate the growth of the Filecoin economy, pulling that data out there. And you get to do that when the Filecoin price and the block reward that parties are getting gets like not perfectly, gets out of equilibrium, right? So why do we have Bitcoin mining happening? Why is there any Bitcoin mining happening at all? Nobody's using the hash rate, right? It's completely wasted. Who's buying, do you want to go buy some hash rate? Like, I don't want hashes. And yet, the entire economy of Bitcoin is funding an operation that's worth billions of dollars a year to produce these wasted hashes. That like stream of value, that's amazing. Aim that at subsidizing the growth of the network to like accelerate it. And so that the block reward causes the negatively priced storage. Being able to fund the operation of the data flow is what gives you the ability to have negatively priced storage, which then accelerates the growth of the network. But I will, yeah, does that make sense?
Sort of, but don't want to distract. We can
Yeah, negatively priced storage is such a weird concept that like I want to leave it out for the most part. One before the next question, like this word allocator. So it seems like we made a mistake. I'll claim that I made a mistake. Mistakes were made. When I call these things notaries, I was really thinking about it as allocations, and you have different processes that allocate data cap. And so they don't have to be people looking at something and signing a thing. It's just a notarization on chain that's like a legit deal. So you're getting allocated some data cap. How that you use that data cap and how long that data cap is worth, for, and so on, it's a whole separate question. And so maybe one thing that we can do is use the word allocators now instead, and think about designing different kind of allocation systems, data cap allocation systems. Some of which might use notaries, some of which might use other kinds of mechanisms, and that might help like bridge a lot of the divide where people very rightfully agree that like the entire industry, the entire crypto Web3 industry was built on not using human organizations to do what you can do in math and in cryptography. So great, let's try to do whatever we can with math and cryptography, but we just can't do that one thing of like verifying all possible data. And so let's do as much as we can, and let's create mechanistic allocators wherever we possibly can. But where we can't, we should then lean on these other systems. Cool.
Sorry, so what I mentioned is a little bit advice for the governments, because we work with Galen, with Kevin for a long time with the Filecoin Plus. So the main goal of the Filecoin Plus was created by 2 or 3 years ago, but right now a lot of real data was starting to onboarding. So the computer could not different what kind of data is, but the human being can. So let's say, for example, we divided for the data set like by different industry or maybe by different kind of content. For example, we upload some a game or videos or MP3, something like that. But this kind of data, for example, the trustless notary can allocate the data cap automatically. Once the content was uploaded into network, the people will download it. We can count down the download times. If nobody downloaded or only one time downloaded, the data may not be interested, and also the data may not be useful.
So that's a suggestion for one allocator that is using like the idea that you can measure a community's use of a resource to signal value.
Yes.
And therefore you could use that to allocate data cap. That's a good suggestion for one allocator. That is not going to fit all data. That is not going to fit archival large-scale data from the LHC. The LHC, most of that data is never read. It's stored and never read.
Yeah, but the carve data should be the petabyte scale, right? They could not generate it by some person, you know.
Yeah.
It will be a company.
Yeah, so I'm agreeing with you. That's a great allocator. That's one of these gray circles in here. Like, design it, let's build it, and let's see how it works and measure the success rate.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, just a quick economic question, if I could. Obviously, today our invoices are in US dollars, and ultimately, did you do any sensitivity modeling? And I completely understand, you know, we want to transact in Fil as much as possible to grow the economic value of the whole ecosystem. But what are your thoughts on the modeling sensitivities around when all that comes into the ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so just to spell it out for everybody, when you price an invoice for work or for a service or something, and the value of the currency that you're using has high volatility, then that just kind of messes up all other parties that are transacting in that currency, unless everybody's just so fully in that currency that you don't see it. So, for example, people don't talk about like the volatility of the US dollar that much because so many people transact in the US dollar that you don't think about it. But if you measure the value of the dollar relative to other assets or to other things, then it has really high volatility. It's just the volatility is a relative measure. So when the Filecoin network is growing, it has to transact with many other economies. And so the volatility becomes a problem when you're trying to transact in that currency. I think the easy solution is to do real-time you price it in real time, meaning kind of like how Amazon changes prices over time. It has like sophisticated ways of measuring what the price should be, and it sets prices carefully to like not shock users, to not and over time kind of give a cost reduction and kind of make everything better. We need to develop those kind of systems that like think about pricing things in terms of the other economies. Like you have to think about pricing it in terms of fiat, and you have in whatever region we're talking about, and in crypto. Like you want to offer in the same kind of way. Think of where you now have two highly volatile things that start pricing with each other. So if you start offering Filecoin data storage to Ethereum users directly in the Ethereum chain, native to Ethereum, they're going to want to be able to pay for it in ETH. And you want to enable that immediate swapping to happen and to fund the entire network and to occur like really neatly and not kind of like shock the smart contracts or the other parties with like wildly varying prices. You want to then like denominate it in stable prices that those smart contracts can reason about, which will be the local currency there. So that means we have to like develop these pricing systems and then project it into Filecoin in like at the last moment.
What you'll probably see is like an in-out, right? Because obviously we'll have to then put it to another currency, which is not as volatile as a crypto one, right? So is there an opportunity to have a basket of currencies which is underpinned by a Fil as an asset?
Absolutely. So when in the kind of like between 3 years and 7 years ago, like there's a lot of discussion in the crypto community about like using crypto as a much better eventually getting to the point where like these systems are better than fiat currencies. Unfortunately, the volatility in these systems relative to fiat, because the systems are so small still, make them feel like really volatile. If you flip the sizes, the volatility would be in the other currency. And so the point being, we should absolutely be thinking of creating baskets of currencies for this kind of thing and using, or other kinds of stable coins, and using them in the design of systems, especially for pricing goods, in that interface with the rest of the economy. Yeah. Or like, for the other economies. It's just kind of like, it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing to get right. There are probably some designs for such currencies where you can take into account, you can model out the decrease in cost in storage over time, and then price it in real currency units today to then give a fixed price forever. This is kind of what the perpetual contracts try to do. They basically try to create a price today that is guaranteed in the long term based on some assumptions about decreasing costs, yields, and so on. And you could do that and end up with another currency that is derived from another currency on top of Filecoin that gives you like some stable unit, which would be a great thing to experiment with.
This is less a question for you and maybe more a question for the other people in the room. Like, I am enthused by JV's idea of having and I think Stephen Lee's brought it up as well, a like random allocator data cap program that, it randomly distributes does the matching between client and storage provider. Again, we know that's not going to work in all contexts, in places where you have restrictions over, what storage environment you want to trust, what storage region you want to trust. But I'm curious if we can form a little coalition of folks that want to go and kind of like we do for when we're authoring FIPS, go and get that Fil Plus new allocation program created, because I feel like it could take a lot of pressure off of some of the current Fil Plus programs, because where clients don't want to go through application processes,
totally,
they can, and they don't have those sort of requirements. We can add that program and maybe over time flow more and more data cap through that program, because it can, all the people who don't want to care about KYC and other things can choose that route.
So the concrete idea here is, given the distribution of providers and clients, could you use randomness? And this is what I said earlier about like mathematical or cryptographic structures. Could you use randomness in choosing which SP it's going to go to, such that it becomes extremely difficult to try and bias that and cheat, in the same way that we use randomness when selecting blocks in producing the chain and so on. This works for certain scales of data and for certain amounts of clients and storage providers. If you have a large distribution of clients and storage providers and you have small scales of data, this works, and we should absolutely build one of these. This doesn't work for large scales of data, and it also doesn't work where you have specific requirements where you have to store the thing in specific geographical locations or with specific certifications. The reason it doesn't work in those cases is because you don't have enough parties there yet to be able to do that. This might work for large data once the network is big enough. To Molly's point, can you raise your hand if you're interested in this thing, and then we'll form a group. Great. So I see one hand back there, 2, 3. JV, are you interested? No?
Yeah, JVs might be a better model of the same thing, which is just trying to, the immediate attack that I can think of on this additional Fil Plus program is, cool, I randomly spam a set of client deal requests. I get allocated a set of storage providers for those client deal requests, and then I only follow up on the one that happens to be with myself, and I don't follow up on any of the others, and then I've effectively attacked the system. Whereas if you follow JV's proposal of a auction-based model, there's stake in the game, and I think anyone can compete against you for the deal instead of it being random, which makes sense too.
Yeah, and also like similar to that, one of the things that we really want to push and test are data clearing houses, where there's some kind of smart contract-backed system that it doesn't release held collateral until all of those deals activate. That could also help prevent situations like that, where someone was attempting to spoof into a auction or a random distribution that they only activate with themselves, that if that one is the only one that gets activated, it wouldn't receive the funding or receive the collateral until it all cleared.
There is actually a Slack channel in the Filecoin Slack called Fil plus Auction Mech Design. If anyone wants to join that, there's only like a few people right now, but it was only made at 11 p.m. yesterday. So
Great. I think Reba has a question, and then maybe a couple more slides, and then we're going to shift to a little bit more of a going down kind of one layer into some of the more tactical implementations of Fil Plus. So,
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit more fundamental question. So take email, full of spam, yet one of the arguably most useful thing we have. My question is, and
Yes, let's keep it.
I understand that. My question is, at this stage of the network's growth age, it's young, are we maybe targeting the wrong percentage of what is abuse, what isn't? Are we trying too hard?
Yeah, so you're saying, hey, like solving this problem in the same way for all types of data causes problems too. So we should probably warp the multiplier based on the networks.
No, I'm actually going the other way.
Okay.
I'm going the other way, like in the slide with the with the devils and and the saints and stuff like that. If there are only 2 green caps and everything else has the horns, this is still a working system.
Yeah.
And can it not grow from that email-like state to where we want it, instead of trying right now to overexpand ourselves on getting it to this state?
No, absolutely. So the amount of spam in email today is vastly smaller than if we didn't have excellent spam prevention techniques. And that's a long-term battle to keep the spam lower than it is today. Which means that we have to, which is a great segue. It's almost like we talked ahead of this talk. We need mechanisms to deal with abuse. We need to clamp down on that abuse and reduce it over time. In the email case specifically, email is so small relative to the LHC data that it doesn't matter very much. It would be great to reduce abuse, but it's just not a big amount of data. A small amount of data cap will cover it. Fundamentally, though, the fundamental question that you're posing is abuse is a serious issue, and we completely agree. We want to get to the ideal outcome. We don't want to be in the terrible outcome, right?
Can we survive in the bad outcome? Is my question effectively.
In the bad outcome with 50% committed capacity, 10% real deals with 40% malicious deals?
Yes.
I think you can survive, but it's not a great place to be. It's a bad place to be. And we should get out of it.
Yes, but bad is better than dead, right? So.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. So can we survive in the bad outcome? Yes. Are we trying to get to the great outcome? Also yes. So let's use mechanisms and systems to push away from the bad outcome into the great and then the ideal outcome.
I don't know the answer to this question, but if we take the mission of Filecoin as the end state, and there's some adoption curve to get there, should we consider limiting some subset of data that makes this problem a lot more solvable in this early adopter phase, and then starting to open it up later? So if you only did public data sets for the first 3 years or 4 years or some amount of total storage capacity, and solve this easier to get to the ideal or great state here, potentially?
I think it's possible. I think that's a question for which allocators do we have and how much data cap are we flowing to them. What we didn't go into is how do you decide how to write the data cap to the allocators? And that's a good hard question to figure out. You need some good mechanisms. I think we need to be very quantitative about this, and we need to measure the success rate of each of these in a bunch of ways, including success rate in terms of clarifying what the data is legit or not, and then separately, how useful is this allocator in general? The GitHub allocator is pretty useful. That's why it's around, even though it's not a lot of data. However, there's other allocators that would be much more valuable, right? And so, yeah, I think that's a great kind of discussion to have and mechanisms to make. The core of the thing that you're saying is could you do like a blanket solution in the shorter term, like public or private? I don't think that's feasible in that we're well into getting customers that have private data that want to use it for like legit private reasons. And we need to be able to support that. And so like, and by the way, most of the abuse is not, I don't think it's private. Most of the abuse is like in the public data set stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's like the distinction. Like there might be other distinctions that narrow the scope of solutions potentially. I don't
There
know.
might be, yeah. It would be great to, we should probably run some discussion about that. So I'm going to propose that we have a session, whole track in Iceland about designs for allocators, designs for measurement systems to measure the success rate of the system as a whole or specific allocators. And then we figure out how to route the data cap over time. And we like turn this into like a solvable problem we can do. The last thing I want to talk about abuse is like we just need to get way better at measuring what's going on in the entire system. And we need to get way better at measuring the success case of each allocator. And then we can, as we introduce new allocators, tune how much data cap they're getting based on their utility. So we have some work to do in terms of building out that structure. So let's use next, a track in Iceland to kind of figure a lot of this out. I'm going to stop extending this 15-minute talk that started 30 minutes late and it has been extended into an hour. So again, I'm very sorry for having to take a lot of time here. I apologize to the track leads that had to deal with my very bad manners as a speaker. But thank you very much.